Joining me now from Brisbane, the Australian's foreign editor, Greg Sheridan. Well, this push by China in our region, Greg, we knew it was serious, but an 8-country tour, Wang Yi himself on the ground, and it's a hell of a lot broader than just the Solomons, isn't it?
Oh, it sure is, Peter. These are fateful days for Australia. We see Chinese ships crawling all over the Australian coast, taking intelligence soundings. And now we see Wang Yi, the foreign minister of the most populous nation in the world, doing an 8-nation tour of the South Pacific. I don't believe an American Secretary of State has ever done an 8-nation tour of the South Pacific, and it's an area of American strategic dominance. You know, I'm not picking sides politically, but I think the Albanese government so far is responding to this with the proper gravity, seriousness and urgency. And I'm glad that Penny Wong is in Fiji. I mean, she's in a sort of a dueling foreign ministers competition of trips with Wang Yi. Well, at least we're in the fight.
Look, there's a lot of things that, you know, I think in a policy sense they took to the election or things, as I said at the top of the show, that they didn't take to the election, they're springing on us now that I'll be critical about. But Wong being out there in the first week in the job in our region, I think is critical. I was critical prior to the election about what Marise Payne didn't do, her exceptionally low profile. I think this is good for Wong.
Yes, I agree with you, Peter. Frankly, it was a bit weird of Morrison to hold the election 3 days before the Quad meeting in Tokyo, but he has given Albanese a tremendous gift because he's allowed Albanese to send critical messages to the Chinese. We're not taking a step backwards. To our allies, that we're with you, we're serious, we're a serious government, we're committed strategically and in defence and all the rest of it. And to the Australian people, I'm a serious Prime Minister, my hero is Bob Hawke, not Gough Whitlam. And then in Penny Wong, he has a very experienced shadow foreign minister, and quite rightly, you know, 1 day back from Tokyo, 4 days after a campaign, she's in Fiji, just where she should be, because, you know, Peter, as you're suggesting, and this is a profound truth, the Chinese are deadly serious about gaining influence and I think gaining military bases in the South Pacific. That would be absolutely disastrous for Australia, and at least the Albanese government is going to try to stop it. The Morrison government tried to stop it too, but it was a bit bizarre, as we revealed in The Australian, that Marise Payne took a submission to the National Security Committee of Cabinet to do more in the South Pacific, and she was rolled. She couldn't get it through. It's a bit bizarre that, you know, Morrison government ministers claimed they knew nothing about this Solomon Islands agreement until it was leaked, whereas obviously they knew everything about it. The whole thing looked pretty unsatisfactory, and so this is only 3 or 4 days into the new government, but so far I think they're doing everything they should be doing.
You're right to say we've got to take the threat from the Chinese communist regime deadly serious, but we know now already from pretty early analysis, but it's there in the numbers on the AEC website. I mean, pretty significant large swings by Chinese Australians, we put it down to, in specific seats, not across the board, against the Liberal Party. And comments today too, Australia's former intelligence chief Duncan Lewis, he said Australia's been rather louder than we should have been in our criticism of China. But on my program the other night, the former head of ASPI, Peter Jennings, well, he had a different view.
Things are bad because Australia, under any government, is not going to be prepared to submit to being dominated by China.
All right, too hard or not hard enough, Greg?
Well, Peter, I think it's a subtle and complex question. First of all, I don't hold with any defamation of Chinese Australians. They're entitled to vote however they like. And there's absolutely no reason to think they voted out of consideration for the Chinese government. I don't think the Morrison government was too hard on China. My criticism of it was that it talked big and did nothing. All the time Morrison and Dutton were telling us we might have to go to war, but they weren't doing anything to provide us with a defence capability. Now, I think Dutton was the best defence minister since the Howard government. I think he's got every chance of being a terrific opposition leader. I think he's a good bloke altogether. but I think it was very irresponsible to talk repeatedly of the possibility of war with China. And the only reason you ever talk of a possibility of war is to prepare your people for the terrible sacrifices they might have to make in blood and treasure. But the government wasn't asking them to make any sacrifices. It wasn't spending an extra dollar on defence. It never even got to 2% of GDP. Now, if some Chinese Australians felt that there was too much heat in the rhetoric, that doesn't mean that they were blaming us and not China for the dispute. And the final point I'd make to you, Peter, is there's a particular difficulty with China because the word China means the political reality of the Chinese government, but it also means ethnic Chinese people. I wish we could revive talking about the Chinese government as a People's Republic of China and use the shorthand, the PRC or something, so that you're not constantly having Chinese Australians having to hear, abuse of the Chinese when what we're really criticising is the Chinese Communist Party. I don't know if our politics can move to that, but that's a helpful suggestion on my part for them.
Not a bad one, because I remember in the Howard government, I worked for a defence minister in that time. We always used to say the PRC was referenced in speeches and media releases. And I don't know what's happened, but we've dropped that over the last little while. Hey, before we go, I reckon you wrote the standout piece on the weekend about the shifting sands in the centre-right vote here and overseas. Before we go, give us your reflections on the weekend, how it fell out for both major parties, because there's a lot in the result, yes, for the Liberal Party, but also Labor too.
Yeah, Peter, so thanks very much for your thoughts on that piece. I think there is a crisis in democracy around the world, which is that people are losing faith in the democratic process, and the only thing they'll take from government really is cash. Now, both sides, the Morrison government and the Albanese opposition, didn't offer any policy narrative at all. They just offered competing spending programs and cash handouts to everybody. And the fact that more or less a third of the country voted for the coalition, a little bit less than a third voted Labor, and a third voted for every odd bod and fruitcake that you could find in the shop, that's not a good thing, because the Westminster system requires that a party or a coalition formulates a coherent program, gets elected on that program, implements the program, and then gets judged on how good it was. Well, I've done radio and TV panels with these independents. There's a lot of them very nice people and so on, but they don't have a schmick of an idea, even of the stuff that they claim as their key policies, like climate change. They have no idea what China is actually doing on climate change. But then you ask them, how are you going to balance this priority against that priority, national security spending, all the rest of it? And I did a panel with one independent who said, I'm neither government nor opposition. Well, what if half the parliament was independent then? Who's going to form a budget? Who's going to have a national security policy? I think this is a very bad development for Australia, and I think the Teals and the independents are essentially populists, single-issue populists who inject a larger dose of unreality and fantasy into our politics, and I think that's a bad thing.
We will watch it unfold over the next 3 years. I suspect at the next election, if it goes the way I think it'll go, we won't have as many independents next time round. Greg Sheridan, thank you for your time.